Hi, I'm Judy Abner. I'm here with Jewish Family Services and also Congregation El Shalom. But it's my job here to introduce our keynote speaker, Melanie Hecker, which is a real pleasure for me. I've known Melanie for a number of years, but the past few years, 2 years, 3 years, since she has been the co-chair of the Inclusion Committee with Barbara Brodsky at OF Shalom, I not only have known her and gotten to know her more, but also have worked with Melanie on an ongoing basis around these issues and around really learning, understanding, and moving forward and bringing about change in our synagogue. And along with that, really learning and being inspired every step of the way. And also being held feet to the fire, as it were. And Melanie, in her own unique way, really keeps us all honest in every discussion, and frankly, in the most important part, which is really in moving forward and actually doing things. So we would have no patience, I know, in meetings with going through all of these steps. We would be starting on the highest and wondering why we're not there and how do we get there, and the heck with the rest of it. So it really is a pleasure for us, or for me to introduce Melanie. So I asked her what she wanted me to say, so I am going to tell you what Melanie would say about herself. That she is a 24-year-old young person on the autism spectrum. She's currently attending the University at Albany in public policy, and she has been an employee of Youth Power, which, if you don't know about that organization, you should, because it's really quite outstanding. New York State, statewide network of young people with disabilities. Quite a very formidable advocacy organization. And she is a graduate of Hudson Valley Community College with a degree in Human Services. And I started with the co-chair of the Inclusion Committee. But Melanie is all about sharing her life experiences and really about helping people see how to move forward and bring about change. So, without further ado,
Timer on. Okay. Hi, so my name is Melanie. Judy introduced me pretty well, and I guess I'll start from the beginning. And when I say the beginning, I mean the very, very beginning. At my earliest memory, my Jewish identity and my disabled identity have intersected. But this intersection has not always been an easy one. I had to leave Ohav Shalom's nursery school at the age of 3 because they could not accommodate my disabilities. Now, we didn't know at that point that it was autism that was giving me the issues, but we did know that I would turn my back to circle time. We did know that I had no sense of danger and would run out in front of cars. Oh, don't worry, I don't do that anymore. I'm 24 now, I've outgrown that. When we knew that I would try to put round pegs into square holes. So we needed a nursery school that could accommodate that. Because of what we eventually discovered to be autism, I could not be placed in a Hebrew day school and wound up doing regular Hebrew school instead. But even the regular Hebrew school was a tough thing for me. Autistic people, we don't like to say that we have a deficit, we like to say that we're different. But that society is not always set up for our differences. And the Hebrew school at the time, it's gotten a lot better now, but at the time, was having a really hard time accommodating my differences, especially as I got older, when my mental health issues started to come out. It was because of those mental health issues that my bat mitzvah had to be delayed until I was 14. So, I used to think that I had to choose between being disabled and Jewish, that it had to be one or the other. Do I feel that now? Absolutely not, and here's why. So when I got older, I started initially volunteering with Youth Power before they took me on as an employee in 2013. And when I was taken on by Youth Power, I discovered how empowering disability rights and disability advocacy can be. And Youth Power taught me all of these wonderful things about disability as an identity and what I can do to help improve things and make society better for people like me. And eventually, even before Youth Power, I started going around giving motivational talks to people, all sorts of audiences. I got to travel to Boston, to Atlanta, to Baltimore, to Omaha, Nebraska, and found the power in my disabled voice. But I still sometimes felt that there was a disconnect. I still sometimes felt that I had a hard time integrating into the Jewish community because of some of my disabling traits. Well, things started to really turn around when I found out about the Ohav Shalom Inclusion Committee. Now, the story goes, how my mom loves to tell it, is that she was told by Rabbi Dan Ornstein to come to this first meeting of the Inclusion Committee, and that she can bring me along if she wants to. Well, I got to that meeting, and I discovered that so many of the skills that I picked up at Youth Power could be used to make Ohav Shalom more accessible to people with disabilities, including developmental disabilities like mine. Now, picture what a revelation this was for me. That I could take a community that I knew was important to me, that I in the past couldn't always connect to 100%, and remove all of the barriers that not just I had, but that a lot of people had. But by this point, I bet you're wondering how we removed those barriers. Well, the first thing we did was order an accessibility audit from Independent Living Center of the Hudson Valley, which Barbara DeVore did for us. And we were given a list of recommendations of improving the accessibility of our shul, which we categorized into short-term, mid-term, and long-term. Short-term things are things we could do right away. The most infamous one was moving a trash can in the women's bathroom. Mid-term things were things that we could do in a couple of months, and long-term in a few months to a year. But as we started putting in these physical accessibility fixes, we found that making any space at all, not just a religious space, more accessible to people with disabilities is not just about putting in more accessible parking or changing our door hinges to make the doors lighter. That it's also about fostering the right kind of environment. It's about fostering an environment where people know disability etiquette, where people aren't afraid to talk with people with disabilities, and where people with disabilities aren't afraid to ask for help if they need it, but at the same time, the help is not forced on them. That's why we created the 10 Commandments of Inclusion, so that we could share these principles with the whole congregation and foster that sort of environment. Now, our next step after the accessibility audit was to do a congregation-wide survey. And a lot of our work from that point forward was based on this survey. Now, I have experience administering surveys since it was one of my duties at Youth Power. And at Youth Power, I always got the strange stuff, like when I put out a survey about alternative testing methods, and somebody responded back saying that they would like to see virtual reality as a testing method. Do you think I would tell that to the Board of Regents? No. But outnumbering that is the useful stuff. In my youth power surveys, to go back to the education survey, it was people telling me that the regents' exams make it so that they don't have enough time for the electives and extracurriculars that help them determine their passions. And we found just as useful stuff in our congregation survey, like the amount of people who need a safe, comforting space for children with emotional behavioral issues, who are not coming to Temple for that reason. I know that my parents had trouble coming to Temple when I was at my worst mental health behavioral wise. People inquiring about bringing service animals. People inquiring about food allergies, which was actually the most common request we got. Kind of not surprised. And people who would like assistive listening devices. So, the congregation spoke, we delivered. And we delivered in some pretty creative ways. Now, when I was working at Youth Power, one of the things that I learned about in my employment there was comfort rooms. Comfort rooms are rooms for people with disabilities to help them calm down if they're overstimulated. And this is usually a restraint and seclusion reduction tool, but we're putting one in our shul, and we did put one in our shul, to address people who are not bringing their children to shul for that reason. Again, is a much more, there's a lot more people like me recognized these days than there used to be. Okay, running out of time, so a few more of our projects have included developing a service animal policy, no emotional support peacocks, improving accessibility to the BEMA, instituting a fragrance limited policy for people who have fragrance sensitivity issues, and gluten-free tables at Kiddush for people with that particular sensitivity. So what has this experience taught me? This experience taught me that I can have my cake and eat it too.
Gluten-free.
My gluten-free cake, that's right. It's told me that I can have both. It's told me that my identities can intersect in a positive way. And most of all, it's told me that all of my identities can empower me and make me proud of my community. Thank you. We have time for like one or two questions, if anyone.
Is the sensory room being used a lot? Do you know?
Well, we're still in the development phase with that.
That's a new idea.
Right now, what we're working on doing is coming up with a key policy for the comfort room, because we need to figure out, where the key is going to be kept, who is going to open it. We're pretty certain that the Parnas is going to be the keeper of the key on Shabbat and holidays, but we still haven't quite figured something out for events like bar mitzvahs and weddings, where people are just as likely to need that. I know that I did at my cousin's bar mitzvah. But the comfort room is an interesting thing. So I told you that I learned about comfort rooms at my employment. My boss, upon learning that I was going to put one in my shul, loaned me a CD-ROM from the Office of Mental Health with guidelines and the types of things you put in comfort rooms. And then when I tried to give it back to her, she said, "Oh, you can keep it. I have several copies of that." But we've tried putting a few introductory items. like things like yoga mats, soft carpeting or rugs, things like that like have soothing tools. And it's a joint project with the nursery school, and the nursery school is totally on board with it because they think that it'll make the nursery school more appealing to families who have kids with disabilities. Yes?
Did you generalize your ideas from the school to the Hebrew school, or is that a separate issue?
Say that again?
Does the Hebrew school benefit from this inclusion committee?
We haven't done much specific to the Hebrew school, but I think that everybody benefits from this, disabled or no. Another thing we're doing that I forgot to mention was, based on Barbara DeVore's recommendations, the Shoal is putting in an ADA accessible playground, which is another cool thing. Now, I should point out that religious organizations do not have to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act, but we're going to anyway, we don't care.